Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're going to begin to start the program right about now. We're so thrilled to have all of you here with us today. We have a very familiar face as part of our guest panel, and it's going to be a fun evening. So welcome to today's program. The World Affairs Council of Greater Houston is so pleased to present Eyewitness, the legendary account of life photographer and World Affairs Council Cabinet member, Mr. Bob Gomel. I'm Marianne Maldonado, CEO of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. And it's great to have so many of our members and students joining us this evening as we discuss the stories behind the amazing photographs of so many people that not only shaped our nation, but were also world leaders, top athletes, and famous celebrities. Before we begin, let me share with you some of our programs that we have upcoming this week. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., again, we are going to have our weekly Wednesday feature, and it's going to be a conversation on global cybersecurity threats. On Thursday at 5, we have our Young Professionals Local to Global meetup. And then this Friday, don't miss joining us. We are going to have our lunchtime Global Connections conversation, focusing on the importance of global literacy. You can find all of our programs that we have available for you on our website at wachhouston.org. And also, if you miss any of our programs, want to catch up, or just want to peruse all of our library of videos that we have available, you can go to the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston's YouTube channel and see not only this recording, but many others. So again, thank you all for joining us tonight, and let's get on to tonight's program. Tonight we feature Eyewitness, a legendary Life magazine photographer, Bob Gomel, which is now available on Amazon Prime. Joining the council's Ronan O'Malley and the producer and director of Eyewitness, David Scarborough, Bob Gomel has had a fascinating and successful career. A photographer for Life magazine, he covered presidents Kennedy and Nixon, cabinet members, governors, and senators. He covered the Bay of Pigs, political conventions, the funerals of MacArthur, Eisenhower, John, and Robert Kennedy. He has also worked with icons in the world of sports, entertainment, literature, and law. During the 1970s, Bob's work branched out to advertising, working on Merrill Lynch's Bullish on America campaign, and also photographed for Bulova, GTE, Audi, and Renault. He also worked on many campaigns for Shell, Houston Lighting and Power, Compaq, Exxon, and so many others. Recently, he has focused on documenting the people and lifestyles of cultures all around the world, from India, Nepal, Russia, Argentina, Israel, China, Ethiopia, Myanmar, Tibet, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia. The list could go on and on. Responsible for having documented many great works of contemporary history, working with world leaders, top athletes, and entertainment celebrities, please welcome Ronan, David, and the star of Eyewitness, photographer, Mr. Bob Gomel. Bob, Ronan, David, welcome.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and thank you very much, Bob and David, for joining us. An excellent evening. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Bob, an incredible member and council cabinet member of the council for many, many years, and obviously one of my favorite members. Before we get into the film itself, you touch upon it in the documentary, Bob, but can you talk about how you mentioned since you were a kid, it was a dream to become a photographer of Life magazine, and what was it that kind of inspired you to kind of pursue photography? And then maybe you could tell us about the interesting path that it took to eventually become an actual photographer for Life magazine.
Yeah, before I get into that question, I would like to mention that I was a great fan. I used to watch Charlie Rowe's interview, and one of the most interesting one to me, which was when he did Richard Avedon, who also went to the same high school as I did. Avedon was extremely articulate and was able to explain his talent with words that I so appreciated. On the other hand, Charlie Rose also did Cartier-Bresson, an equally famous photograph, who was inarticulate, unfortunately. I think I'm falling into the category with the latter. But anyway,
your photographs speak for yourself, so that's
well, what happened with my introduction was that I was in grade school, and next to my desk on the wall, my teacher had mounted a photograph of his, of a pigeon on top of a manhole cover on a cobblestone street. And I was so impressed with that photograph. I can see it in my mind even today. And I knew from that moment on that photography would be my calling. That's how it started.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit. I know it was a difficult path, but how you go from that kid who gets inspired by a photograph in his classroom to becoming arguably one of the most desired and incredible jobs a photographer would have, and that's to be a frontline photographer for Life magazine.
Well, I started because I knew I needed a camera with more control than my family's Brownie. So I delivered groceries one winter and earned enough money to buy my first camera with control. And from that point on, I convinced my family to turn over a closet in our apartment so I could develop my film, a dark room. I like to tell people I spent the rest of the 4 years in the closet, but they misinterpret that statement. I worked for the high school newspaper and then my college paper. And I was fortunate in that my college played sports, which were covered by the New York press. And they befriended me and allowed me to go with them. This was a period of 4 years on their assignments and watch them and how they worked. And I learned a lot about professional photojournalism from just those guys. When I graduated, unfortunately, the Korean War was still going on. And so I enlisted in the Navy, and I went through flight school, became a naval aviator. And finally, 4 years, when I was finished with my obligation, I came back and I was determined to work for one of the picture magazines, of which there were Saturday Evening Post, Look magazine, and Life magazine. So I would go and show my portfolio to these three publications every so often. But a terrible accident happened to my brother. He was involved in a serious car crash, and my family was beside themselves. It took a period of several months. We were running back and forth to the hospital, and I was doing what was natural to me. I was recording my family in crisis. Well, along came time for my Life magazine regular interview, and that was all I had done lately. And I showed it to them, and they offered me a commission to complete that story. And that is exactly how I began my career with Life. They started giving me assignments to cover the United Nations. I covered Lyndon Johnson, Jack Parr, sporting events and so forth. But that's how it all began.
So pretty incredible. And David, maybe you could let us know, how did you get the idea for this documentary in the first place?
That's a good question. I got to meet Bob through mutual contacts of photographers. I was a professional photographer too earlier in my life. And so I'm very familiar with a lot of the photographers in town. I knew of Bob. I hadn't ever met Bob, but we met one time at a meeting of American Association of Media Photographers meeting. And, it struck me, when he walked into the room, you could tell this. Everybody kind of stopped and looked over. Here comes this guy. He's impeccably dressed, and he's just kind of controls the room with his with his speaking and his stories. And you're looking at all these other photographers there who are all kind of, photographers are all kind of type A personality people. And, they're all unimpressed with everything, but they're all hanging on every word Bob says. And Bob's very approachable and very always willing to help. And, he's offers his expertise and his advice, and you would never asked. And so, he's always real good about that. But so, listening to Bob tell the stories of some of the things you actually see in the documentary, he's telling them to me, he's telling them to me and my wife. We hit it off as friends and started socializing with our spouses, and just, all these stories were so great. And so after a dinner one night with Bob and his wife, my wife and I, my wife Mary, were talking. I said, we got to figure out a way to get this down to where other people see this part of the images that Bob is famous for. So there's so much, it said picture tells 1,000 words, but there's a lot of story behind the story. So that was kind of the motivation for it.
Yeah, indeed. And there, Bob has so many incredible stories behind the photos themselves are wonderful, but to hear how he got it or what connection or what he thought of or how he crafted it is fascinating. Bob, just and for yourself, after spending a career in behind the lens, what was it like to actually be kind of the one in front of the lens?
Well, let me tell you, that was a difficult thing. But the very first thing that David did that impressed the hell out of me was to hire a makeup lady who made me up. And I remember after the first film session, I went home and I asked my wife what she thought of my makeup. And she said, leave it on as long as possible.
I see. And Bob, in the film, you mentioned that a part of your drive was to capture the most momentous occasions, and I think it's truly apparent in many of your shots. So, I mean, it's difficult to put it in a short, few sentences, but how would you approach your approach to taking memorable pictures?
Well, it's not so difficult to explain. I wanted to always create images that would make the viewer look at them and say, wow.
Well, I think you definitely succeeded. and also, as is highlighted in the film, you go behind the scenes and kind of spend, large amounts of time with everyone from Nixon to Kennedy to Marilyn Monroe to the Beatles. Is part of the art or the skill or the tool set of a photographer, especially with such high profile people like this, is part of your ability and your skill set to be able to set them at ease, to get them to feel comfortable. How did you do that with some of these subjects?
I'm reminded of another great photographer in my time, Joseph Karsh. At the beginning of World War II, Winston Churchill came to Ottawa to address the Canadian Parliament, and Karsh had a 15-minute audience with him, for which the lights were all set up, and Churchill came into the in front of the camera with his typical cigar in his mouth, and Karsh cocked the shutter and reached out and yanked that cigar out of Churchill's mouth, and Churchill's expression was stern as it could possibly be. Now, that particular photograph was the inspiration for England to persevere against that horrible bombing they went through night after night through the Nazi Air Force. And I have never forgotten that story. He knew exactly, Karsh did, what he was after, and he figured out a way that he could achieve those results. And that's what I try to do before I pick up that camera.
And I suppose on the flip side of it, I think if you told most people, hey, you're going to go in and meet with Vice President Nixon in 1960 and photograph him, or after that, meet with Kennedy after he's been elected, or even perhaps more so, go and meet with Marilyn Monroe. I know you have nerves of steel because you landed on carriers off the coast of Korea, but how did you control your own nerves?
Well, you're absolutely right. After 4 years of flying this baby, and being scared to death for most of that period of time, photographing presidents and ball players or what have you was easy. They didn't bother me.
And then in terms of, I think a lot of people, if they look through your photos, what they'll really see is that you capture the essence of the person, the human side of a person. Do you feel that's, you say, part of a professional photographer's responsibility, especially for a massive magazine like Life? You know, you have incredible shots of JFK very shortly after the death of his newborn son, or, you know, the mighty Cassius Clay, who became Muhammad Ali, this big fearsome boxer, happily bouncing your toddler on his lap, you know, or President Nixon, or at the time maybe his Vice President Nixon with his dog Checkers. Do you feel that was part of your job, was to give the human side of these incredible individuals?
I considered my job to do as much homework as I could about the subjects I was about to photograph, so that when I did finally meet them face to face, I could talk to them about things that they were particularly engaged in and involved in. I didn't come at them as somebody in the street. I had some knowledge of where they were at and what they were doing. And that immediately set me up in a different kind of a relationship than if I had just walked in off the street and said, can I take your photograph? So the other thing was, when I engaged these people, I would ask them to think about a particular subject which I knew was engaging to them. And it was at those moments of reflection that I would feel that I made the penetration, that I got through the veneer and got the essence of who they really were. A very good example, by the way, is this week's cover of Time magazine. RBG cover is just a fantastic picture. And my hat is off to the photographer that was able to break through that veneer and get that wonderful image.
And in addition to kind of the artistic side of and also the kind of psychological side of, I suppose, setting your subjects at ease and capturing their true self, can you maybe discuss, you mentioned a variety of examples in the film, from setting up shots on a bobsled going 100 miles per hour that you were in, or, you know, scaling the heights of the Capitol for, you know, the dome to take photos of Eisenhower's funeral, or the airplane stack up at JFK. Can you talk about how a photographer's imagination and creativity, long before they even pick up the camera, in a lot of ways can be just as important to figure out how to get a shot and where to get a shot?
Yes, it's a good question. I think I approached my subjects with knowledge of what had come before, what had been done prior or previously. And I wondered and thought about how I could do it better and differently. And that was basically the way I approached everything. With the bobsleds, they had been photographed most readily from the sidelines, but I thought that it would be very revealing to mount a camera on the cowl of the bobsled and get a more intimate view that couldn't be achieved from the outside. And I did that countless times, wondering how I could do something better and different than anything had been done before. I didn't want to be part of the pack. I wanted something above that at a different level.
And maybe could you, it's perhaps not an easy thing to explain, and maybe it's difficult for anyone to answer, but I think a lot of people would agree in a lot of ways, you know, even in the modern era, we've had, you know, video footage, you know, going back decades now, but a lot of ways, the most indelible images in Americans or world's memories of key events or key people are photographs. They're still images. And why do you think it is that perhaps a powerful photograph can be much more kind of memorable and effective than, say, video of the exact same person or event?
Well, it's a very good question. And I certainly agree with the premise. Um, I can only say that all my life, that truism has held forth. A great photograph perseveres. A film slides by, and as excellent it may be, you can't hold one particular image in your mind's eye as you can with a still photograph.
And then kind of for the layman's level, obviously most of us aren't going to work for an incredible magazine like Life magazine, but what would you suggest to kind of just the person who has a love for photography, but is not an expert professional, but what are a few hints you might suggest about how to make your own pictures better?
Well, I always tell my wife, who has become an excellent photographer, move in close. I notice when I travel with tourists, they're too far away. Move in close. Work the situation till you have exhausted every possible thing you can think of to do to make this thing, not just take a snap and walk away from it, but explore the angles. Should you be low? Should you be high? Should you be left, right? What about the lighting? What about the time of day or night? All those things you should explore and work until you absolutely, positively cannot think of another thing to do. And then you go home and hope that you got it. If not, come back tomorrow and try again.
Okay, sounds great. And David, as you noted before, you're a professional photographer yourself. But could you maybe talk about how this film was made and perhaps the surprising manner or cameras that you actually filmed it on?
Yeah, so my background is in photography, still photography, not to the level of Bob's, but I worked for the wire services and newspapers and sports magazines for 10, 12 years. The still photography and the lighting and everything, I kind of understood as a professional photographer should. I wasn't much into video. I hadn't done a lot of video. I'd recently done some video, but not a whole lot. And so the goal of this, as I'm going through the whole idea in my mind when we're going through it, is to really keep it simple, right? So let Bob talk, let the focus be on Bob and on his pictures, and don't draw any attention away from that. And so just to keep it as simple as possible, and so that I didn't have to get too bogged down into the technology. It was actually, the entire video was shot on a pair of iPhones, iPhone 10. So it was, there's some very sophisticated movie applications you can get for the iPhone. We used those. We used some good lighting. We used a really good makeup artist, and we kept it simple. And so, it was this, you don't see a lot of zooming. You don't see a lot of panning or cutaways. It's Bob talking, two angles, and then Bob's pictures. And that's the impact. I didn't want anybody to ever come away from this and saying, wow, that was some great camera work there. It's just, I want them to come away with it knowing that they understood Bob's pictures better than they did before they watched it.
Yeah. That's great. And then, and Bob, just to kind of move it into the last many years, especially that a lot of us have known you, what are some of your current interests and subject matters for your photography? And I'll put a plug in for the World Affairs Council. I've seen some incredible photos you've taken while on a number of our great trips to, I think, Myanmar and India and other places.
Well, that is a great question. And I would tell you that my interest is now, and really always has been, in the lifestyle of people, particularly those cultures that are not very well known in the general public. And I've had the good fortune, after leaving my career as a journalist, to travel to far-flung places like Russia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, Ethiopia, India, China, Mongolia, Belarus, Indonesia, and I might add several of which were with the World Affairs Council of Houston, which has always been a pleasure.
And then just for a lot of people who know you and know your photographs, maybe, but would like a little more information or perhaps even to buy prints, what are some of the places your photos are displayed, and what's some of the ways people can access them?
Oh, sure. Well, there are lots of books that have my photographs for over many years on different subjects. But I'm also on display at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, at the African American Museum, also in Washington, and at the Museum of Fine Arts right here in Houston. They have a collection of my photographs. Most recently, the Library of Congress is publishing a 20-page book titled Great Photographs, in which they have honored me and included one of mine.
That's wonderful. And David, yeah, I think it's a kind of interesting juxtaposition. Was it a challenge to kind of convey and discuss the photographers of an incredible photographer, but to do it in the medium of video?
Yeah, well, the challenge was to make sure that they got the full impact. And one of the challenges, you know, video is a horizontal medium and a lot of the photographs were vertical. So, you know, how do you do that? And that's when you see a lot of the split screen stuff with Bob talking and, you know, appearing to look at the picture and things like that. And Bob was very involved in the creative process, and we went back and forth on how much panning, you know, the kind of Ken Burns effect to use and how much not to use. And you know, one of the more challenging images, you know, it's probably as we get done with this through all of them, my favorite segment, because we both worked so hard on it, was the Eisenhower funeral, because you have one image from that whole event that we're featuring on there. You know, you had the Beatles, you had 30 images, Kennedy, 30 plus images, Ali, the same thing. But the Eisenhower funeral had one shot. It was a cover shot, an incredible cover shot. But the story behind it is about a 10-minute story. So how do you capture that on the video without, you know, just throwing a picture up there? And so we worked really, really hard on that one. Went back and forth on it. You know, had some, you know, brisk creative discussions on it. But it's my favorite part of the film is that one piece, because it brought a lot of challenges together. How do you have a 10-minute discussion around one photograph in a video?
That's great. And Bob, I mean, could you talk about what it was like to have a film made about your career? I mean, I'm sure it's kind of unusual for you.
That's a very good question. And let me tell you that for many years now, people who have listened to my stories have said, you ought to do a picture book, a coffee table book. Well, I did my homework, and I noticed that the market in coffee table photography books is satiated. It no longer has the appeal that it once did 30, 40 years ago. And in addition to that, the younger generations don't really read anymore. They look at pictures and watch films. So when David suggested this idea of film, I said, voila. Here is a legacy that I can pass on to my great-grandchildren, and they will very probably be able to watch it.
And, you know, just in a bigger, broader sense, Bob, you know, especially when we think in terms of being behind the scenes with presidents or people when they're going through very difficult or challenging times. As a photographer, did you ever feel challenged in that, say, for instance, you have some famous photos when you were accompanying Kennedy, when I think he was going around the country to different bases and kind of, you know, presidential kind of preparations, you know, at bases to see the conditions they were in during the Cuban Missile Crisis. For instance, you were with Kennedy at that time. Could you pick up on his state of mind? Did he seem anxious? Did he seem nervous? And as a photographer, did you feel if he did seem nervous or anxious, which would be normal, would that be appropriate to depict that, or to kind of maintain an image of a president that people might want to see?
No, I think I would not have, you know, back in the days of the Roosevelt administration, which I was not present for, his handicap, his physical limitations were well respected by the members of the photographic press, and he was never photographed until he was set in position. But that has changed a lot. And I think what we build up is a relationship of trust in good or bad times. We're a part of the scenery. And I think these people that you mentioned understand that and understand that we've got a job to do. And for the most part, they respect our needs, and as long as we don't get too much in their face.
And for a lot of those, credible people in history, behind the scenes, were their personalities, were any of them surprising or quite different from what you expected, or was it kind of maybe perhaps what we might have seen as the general public?
Well, I would suggest that the people that I was asked to photograph were all wonderfully gregarious types who had an ability, or they would to win over people by virtue of their personality, or they wouldn't have gotten to where they are in the first place. I mean, for example, today, Richard Nixon is not held in very high regard in many quarters, but I found him to be a charming, a delightful person to work with. And we shared lots of stories and went to football games together and did all kinds of things that I ingratiated myself with him and vice versa. So when I was there at the Republican convention one year, I was allowed in the room with him while on an 8.5 by 11 yellow pad, he was writing out his acceptance speech. And I just sat there along with one other photographer, David Douglas Duncan. Nixon accepted us as part of the inner circle of friends.
And maybe also just you touched upon something that's a little bit interesting. You have some incredible photos that, at least at the time, were not published. It might have taken a while to come to. But could you maybe share us a few of the photos that you brought with us today that may not have come out back when they were first shot? There's incredible photos that are famous now in their own rights, and maybe we can present some of those.
That's an excellent question, Ronan. The exigencies of the magazine business were such that we shot hundreds of pictures every day, and they were sent up to the main office, and there was editing and deadlines and whatnot. And a lot of things were not deemed appropriate or fitting at that particular moment to those editors, whatever their point of view might have been, or the real important thing. This was a good case in point. It was never even printed, not only in the magazines, but it wasn't even offered to the editors of the show. It was totally overlooked. And not until many years later, when I was here in Houston going over my old negatives, did I find that picture and thought, my goodness, it's one of the best images I ever shot, along with the one you're showing now. This captured the personality, and it was just overlooked at the time from the point of view of never having been published by the magazine that commissioned me to do it in the first place.
And just for the first one you showed of JFK stepping out of the capsule, was that in Florida or in NASA here in Houston?
It was right here in Houston, right after the speech at Rice University. We went over there, and that's a mock-up of the Apollo capsule.
Okay. And then I think we have a third photo that was not famous until later. Maybe we could bring a few of these up.
Yes, that is an incredible story, how the editor of Life, God bless him, he did not care much for the Beatle phenomenon, and he wasn't disposed to run it. We did get assigned to cover it, and as you can see here from some of my pictures, they were very good photographs, but they were completely overlooked by Life, never ran in Life. And finally, just a few years ago, I think this particular story was printed in 2015. Pictures that I shot in 1964. I finally was able to get these. I was asked about these pictures, and they were published in this particular magazine. After all that many years, they saw the light of day.
And just
Ronan.
briefly, I think this is from is this from their first tour to the United States? What were they like in person?
This is, yeah, it is the first tour, but let me explain. They came into New York first, appeared on the Sullivan Show, trained to Washington for a performance down there, and then back to New York, and then flew to Florida for a second performance on the Sullivan Show by popular demand in Miami. I accompanied them on the flight from New York to Miami and then stayed with them through that period.
And what were their personalities like behind the scenes? Were they kind of as jovial and kind of fun as they seemed?
They were very humble. I was quite impressed with their modesty. They unassuming and wanted to be directed and told and fulfilled whatever it was that I had up my mind. So when we got down to it, as explained in the film, we ended up taking them to a private residence where we could have some privacy, and I asked them to just enjoy themselves, go have fun, and they indeed did. The cannonballing is a good example of that. Later on, in fact, the next day, I took them to Miami Beach, where we ran into a bevy of girls, teenage girls, and they jumped all over the Beatles, and it was just quite a wonderful experience. But the most famous picture here that everybody seems to appreciate the most is of the four lads lounging in the chairs, catching some rays.
Maybe let's pull up the last one of your kind of later released photos, but an incredibly famous photo that's now really part of American history.
Yes, well, here too, it did not fit the needs of the publication at the time. And so it was completely bypassed, and it really didn't see the light of day until I discovered it and promoted it to other sources. This was Afterlife, and it achieved a fame at the gallery that sells my work to the extent that it is my all-time most popular picture from the standpoint of sales. And I am still hard-pressed to exactly understand why this picture outshines everything else that I've done from the point of view of people wanting to own a copy.
Yeah, well, I think it's quite incredible. And we'll come back, we'll go away from the photos now, but I think the idea that you have two icons of American history and the American Civil Rights Movement, both together in the same photo and kind of almost playing and interacting with each other. It's an amazing shot. And I'm going to turn to the audience questions now. I just wanted to bring those up. Bernard asks, is the business of being a photojournalist different today? And if so, how?
I think that it's perhaps different. Talent will prevail. There's a lot more competition out there, and there's a lot more outlets. So there's a lot of coverage of everything that's going on, but there are still exceptionally wonderful examples of the best of photojournalism available, and I see every day pictures that I would have been proud to call my own. I don't think the technology, of course, allows more capability, perhaps, than we did with film. However, it is still in the mind of the artist is the governing factor, not the equipment. I always love to tell a story about a famous writer I worked with who admired one of my pictures and inquired as to what camera I used to take it. And I answered him by saying that I had read his most recent article and I was curious about what typewriter he used to tell that story. And I think he got the point right away.
So a great retort. And related to that, someone asked, if everyone has an iPhone and everyone's able to take photos nowadays, is it more difficult for a professional photographer to make his or her work stand out?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think it's perseverance and dedication and a lifelong trial and error process. We don't hit home runs every time we're up at bat. It's impossible. Sometimes they're doubles and singles, and sometimes we strike out. But we don't let a strikeout go by without learning from it and remembering how we might be able to do it better next time.
All right. And another viewer asks, have you shot any pictures of famous Houstonians?
I'm sorry, famous?
Houstonians. Have you shot any photos of famous Houstonians?
Oh, yes, sure. I did quite a bit when I moved here in 1977, and I was getting assignments from magazines like Fortune magazine and Newsweek and so forth. And yes, I did quite a bit of photography of prominent people in Houston and vicinity as well.
And I have some great questions here from Sean. Sean asks, did your approach to photography in your family, your personal life and family, differ from your paid work? And I suppose, if so, how?
I'm sorry.
When you photograph your own family and your personal life, how is it different to when you're working as a photographer, as a professional photographer?
Well, that's a great question. I love that because I can't help but apply the same rules. I don't like superciliousness in photographs in general, and I certainly don't enjoy being a part of something that I feel is just skin deep or superficial. So I'm always trying to juice it up a little bit with some introspection, something that tells a little bit of a story somehow. The best example I can give you is one of my sons is a dentist, and we were doing some idea to show the ethnic mix of the people that they handle. So I had them in the studio. I had hired a group of models of different ethnicities, and the excitement wasn't there. Now my son and his partner were off to the side watching this session, and in desperation, I called them. I said, "Hey, Todd, Barry, get over here and sit on this thing." And when he got there, I said, "Okay, now tickle the kids." And that turned out to be a wonderful ad. It became a billboard, but it was my need to have something happen, to come alive, and to be, exciting, that makes that happen. And I'm of a personality that requires that of myself anytime I go out.
Great. And Carlos asked an interesting question. For you, what are the best Pulitzer Prize winning photos? What do you think are some of the most momentous photos that have been taken?
Photographs by other people?
Yeah, including all photographers kind of in history. For you, what are some of the the best Pulitzer Prize winning photos? What are the ones that really stand out to you?
Well, they don't necessarily come under the category of Pulitzer Prize winning because they tend to be more spot news. My interests are much more varied than that. I will just go back to 1930 and Cartier-Bresson again, where we started this interview, and say that looking at decisive moment today is still one of the most exciting visual experiences I can think of.
Okay, great. And Colleen and Chris ask, would you give us your comments on the transition from film photography to digital photography?
It was almost overnight. I mean, initially, there was a difference in quality, but digital soon caught up and then finally surpassed. And although there were a few stalwarts who still maintain their film camera and presence, I saw no reason not to move ahead with the improvement in technology and what opportunities it afforded me.
All right, great. And related to that, you know, Sean asks, and in that, you know, how has digital photography changed your approach to photography?
Well, one of the things is that you can, I used to shoot 20 rolls a day on any little thing, and that's a lot of film to go through. But with digital cameras, you have the option of looking at what you're doing as you're doing it. And therefore, you can make improvements and be a lot more efficient in terms of you know, how much production you're giving a thing. Also, the digital cameras, for example, or digital technology. I have a wonderful picture of the fireworks over downtown Houston skyline, which I did with film, and opened the shutter and kept it open and closed and open and closed on the same sheet of film several times to build up fireworks in all the quadrants of the sky. Today, that's much easier accomplished. In post-production, you can shoot on a tripod, shoot all the individual fireworks, and then you can blend them together on your computer screen. So it's a much more positive way of accomplishing the same thing. And it's every bit just as legitimate. The important thing is, have you told the truth? Or is this I would not have put Kennedy in a Miami hotel room with Castro, something idiotic like that. That would be an absolute falsehood. Is it possible technically? Of course it is. And you see that all the time on the internet. I would make sure that I'm still speaking the truth, even as I sometimes move objects around in a photograph or make little corrections.
All right, and interesting question here from Dorit asks, I'm inspired by your story to follow your footsteps. I feel insecure about my writing quality, and I see my father's story in images more than words. He was born in Romania in 1933, and he also moved to Houston in 1977. What do you recommend for someone who's 62 and looking for a new career?
Malbec. The wine.
But if you have a passion for photography, I think you would say at any age, just pursue it.
Oh, he's 87 years old and he wants to start a career in photography?
62, yeah.
I thought you said he was born in 33, I'm sorry.
Sorry, his moved to Houston in 1977.
Okay, well, look, photography is a tough game to get into. You have to have a burning in your gut to succeed. And very few have that, I'm going to say $64 word, perspicacity to follow through on that. And that's the difference. If you really want it bad enough, there's a way to get it.
And Ronan, if it's any help, I'm 61 and I just did my first movie. So
Yeah, that's a great point. Good. Thank you, David. I hope we encourage people, you know, if you have passion to write or pursue photography, you don't have to win a Pulitzer Prize or work for Life magazine. You can still enjoy it and perhaps have a good career out of it. Karma asks, Bob, are there any, or either of you, are there any upcoming photographers you feel we should keep our eyes on?
Well, for my part, some of my current heroes are right now on the staff of the New York Times, which I read religiously every day, and absolutely amazed at some of the photographs they come up with.
I see. And this is, I suppose, maybe something if you want to comment it as much as a question, but Jim says, I've been friends with Bob and Sandy for 20 years, encouraging him to do a book about his story. David Scarborough did an extraordinarily good job of telling this amazing story, and you should encourage everyone to go and watch the video. It is a lens into our history of the past 50 years. So thank you, Jim, and I know it's high praise to you, David, and for your work and what you put together, and Bob for a great career.
thank you, Jim. Yeah.
Evan asked, Bob, when photographing Ali and Malcolm X, if I understand you correctly, you were the only white person in attendance at the hotel where they were staying in Miami, which was in the Green Book. How did you end up at that hotel, and what was the environment like there as a photographer?
Well, I was not only the only Caucasian, I was also the only member of the press, but I was with Ali in his dressing room right after the fight, where he changed into a tuxedo, and went with him to the hotel where we enjoyed celebration. So it was very comfortable for me. I had no thought whatsoever of any concern except to record this momentous occasion. Lost his voice.
I suppose, did you kind of stand back and let it happen? I mean, it must have been a pretty fun and lively atmosphere after he'd won the fight to be in that cafe. And how do you, I suppose, capture the right image, but at the same time not interject yourself too much into the story?
Well, with Ali, who was still Cassius for a few more hours at that point, you just have to stand back and let him perform. He is such a marvelous entertainer. In fact, after that picture that you showed just a moment ago, he went on to entertain the crowd. He played a matador. He did all kinds of things, and he was very amusing and entertaining all by himself. My job was made very simple and easy to just record what was happening.
Okay, another good question. David asks, what is your favorite photographic memory?
Being in the tiny dressing room with Little Egypt after a performance.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. And another David asks, what are you shooting professionally now? And I suppose when you do take photographs, what do you use now?
What do I?
I suppose first question is, are you still working professionally? You know, and whenever you're just shooting yourself now, what cameras are you using?
Well, the answer is I long abandoned I do not work professionally anymore. What pictures I do make are for my own satisfaction. And in terms of cameras, what's happening is the lighter they are, the better I like them.
Okay. And a good question here from Ilias. And now that you're interested in taking photos of daily life in different ethnic and cultural settings around the world, how do you establish a rapport with your subjects in the short amount of time that you have with them?
Well, I do it often with sign language. and facial expressions. When I try to make my presence, there's sort of a universal way of communicating with people, even though you haven't got a common language. And I think you do it with your gestures and sometimes with your perseverance. But for the most part, I don't get no pictures. I don't get that kind of thing unless it's from the military, perhaps.
Okay, Paresh asks, the camera always seemed to capture JFK's charm and charisma. Was he always okay? Was he always camera ready? And did the room feel different when he was in it?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Ask when JFK, obviously incredibly photogenic and incredible charisma, did the room feel different when he was in it?
I think we were all, the press, all of us in love with him, put it simply. We just enjoyed his presence so much, and there wasn't a negative person in the rooms that were filled with press and whatnot. He was a very, charisma is the perfect word. It's a way of defining JFK.
All right, great. And just in conclusion, maybe first I'll turn to you, David. What would you like people to take away from the film?
Well, I hope they get a better understanding of what it takes to do these incredible photos that Bob has taken. I mean, there's a lot of work. Like, you listen to the story behind the Eisenhower picture, or even the Kennedy funeral. He had access. He got access that I just don't think you get today, and it was by his own wits that he got that access. And so there's a lot of talent behind getting in position to get the good picture, and Bob really personifies that. So I just hope they enjoy the pictures. I hope it brings more personal to them, more to life, if you will, rather than just looking at them on a print or in a book. And they get to know Bob. I mean, Bob's, he's a great guy, great to hear his stories, and you missed that from other pictures. And so my hope was that people got a little bit more out of this than they had when they came in.
Thank you, David.
And one more note too,
sure.
Talking about the Beatles pictures that were never published. My wife, when we first got to know Bob, it was around my 60th birthday, so it was over a year and a half ago, and she bought me the Beatles in the lounge chairs print. And it's actually, I'm looking at it right now. It's right behind this computer that I'm looking at. It hangs proudly on my wall. So that's one of my favorite pictures. And I have the book with that print in it long years before I ever met Bob. So it's personal to me. The stories, the way he gets the pictures, and they really hit home to me as a photographer and as somebody who enjoys the medium. And I just hope that would carry over in the film.
Thank you, David. And Bob, I suppose the same question. What would you like people to get out of or kind of take away from this film?
Well, I'm first of all thrilled and thank David and World Affairs Council for giving us this platform to show this stuff. And it's kind of vindication for a lot of years of wondering and second guessing. And it's finally come to fruition. And I'm humbled by that and much appreciated.
Thank you. And again, just for the audience, I know a lot of you have seen it, but if there are any of you who haven't seen it yet or want to tell any friends or family, the best way to see it is on Amazon Prime. If you just search for Gomel, G-O-M-E-L, or the word Eyewitness, it'll pop up right there. And just to let you know about maybe two of our upcoming events. Tomorrow, we're hosting another live webinar with Paul Williams on cyber threats to the United States. And next Wednesday, Bob was mentioned in the New York Times, we'll be hosting the White House senior bureau chief for the New York Times, Peter Baker, and Susan Glasser of the New Yorker, and they'll be talking about their acclaimed new book, The Man Who Ran Washington, The Life and Times of James Baker. So I wanted to thank you very much again, David Scarborough, for joining us, and especially one of those incredible members, one of my favorite members of the council, Bob Gomel. Thank you so much, both of you. It's an excellent film. And thank you, Bob, so much for really chronicling so many of the most important and powerful moments of our history. Thank you.
Well, thank all of you.
Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.